I wasn't hiding. I was watching. And after 15 years of building something extraordinary while my family dismissed every step, I'd learned that silence is the most powerful weapon you can wield. My name is Rebecca Chen, and the story of how I became the family embarrassment started long before Mike's wedding reception turned into his public humiliation. It started when I was 22, fresh out of Stanford with a computer science degree, and my family couldn't understand why I wasn't rushing into a corporate job like my cousins. "Rebecca's taking a gap year," my mother would say at family gatherings, her tone dripping with apologetic embarrassment. "You know how these artistic types are. Basic." That's what they called software engineering when they didn't understand it. My cousin Mike, 3 years older, had just landed a position at a mid-tier consulting firm. He made $85,000 a year and acted like he'd conquered Wall Street. Every family dinner became his opportunity to lecture me about real careers and practical choices. "You can't just mess around with computers forever, Becca," he'd say, using the nickname I hated. "At some point you need to grow up and get a real job." I was building my first startup in my studio apartment, a data analytics platform for small businesses. I worked 16-hour days, lived on ramen, and taught myself everything the traditional education system hadn't covered. My parents thought I was unemployed. My aunts whispered that I'd wasted my Stanford degree. Uncle David suggested I apply to be his secretary. The startup failed after 18 months. I lost my $50,000 in savings. My family's response? "Told you so." Mike cornered me at my grandmother's birthday party. "Ready to join the real world now? I could probably get you an entry-level position at my firm. Receptionist, maybe?" "I'm good," I said quietly. "Starting something new." He laughed. "Another hobby project? Becca, you're 24. This is getting embarrassing." What Mike didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my failed startup had taught me everything I needed to know about what not to do. And I was already 3 months into building something better. My second company was different. Smarter. I'd identified a massive gap in the market. Mid-sized companies needed enterprise-level cybersecurity but couldn't afford enterprise-level prices. I built a scalable solution that automated 80% of what companies were paying security consultants $300 an hour to do manually. I called it Secure Shield Solutions. I didn't tell my family. Why would I? They'd already decided I was a failure. Instead, I worked quietly. I brought on 2 co-founders I'd met in online developer communities. Brilliant engineers who believed in the vision. We bootstrapped for the first year, living on credit cards and determination. Year 2, we landed our first major client, a manufacturing company with 500 employees. They paid us $180,000 annually. Then another client. Then another. By year 3, we had 43 clients and $4.2 million in annual recurring revenue. Mike got promoted to senior consultant. He made $120,000 a year and bought a BMW he couldn't quite afford. At my cousin Sarah's engagement party, he spent 20 minutes explaining how his investment portfolio was performing, which mostly meant his 401k and some Bitcoin he'd bought at the peak. "What about you, Becca?" Aunt Linda asked. "Are you still doing your computer thing?" "Yeah," I said. "Still doing the computer thing." Mike smirked. "She means unemployed." "It's okay, Aunt Linda. We can't all be driven." I sipped my wine and said nothing. Secure Shield had just closed $8.5 million series of funding round. I owned 62% of the company. But Mike didn't need to know that. None of them did. Year 4, we scaled aggressively. I hired a world-class executive team, people with decades of experience who saw what I was building and wanted in. Our client list grew to 200 companies. Revenue hit $23 million. We were profitable, growing 300% year over year, and I was 28 years old. Mike got married that year. Not the wedding where everything fell apart, but his first marriage. I was invited out of obligation. At the reception, he introduced me to his college friends. "This is my cousin Rebecca. He's between opportunities right now." Between opportunities. I was running a company that would be valued at $180 million within 2 years. But to Mike, I was just his unemployed cousin who'd never figured out life. I smiled politely. "Something like that." His wife, Jennifer, tried to be kind. "What field are you looking in?" "Tech mostly." Mike jumped in. "She does websites. Freelance stuff. It's hard to find steady work in that field." I nodded. It can be challenging. What I didn't mention, I'd just been invited to speak at TechCrunch Disrupt. Forbes had reached out for an interview about women in cybersecurity. And I'd started my own venture fund with $25 million of my own capital to invest in early-stage companies founded by underrepresented entrepreneurs. The venture fund was personal. I knew what it felt like to be dismissed, to be told you weren't serious, to watch mediocre men with half your vision get funding while you bootstrapped on credit cards. So I built something different. A fund that actually looked at the business model instead of whether the founder looked the part. I named it Catalyst Ventures. We invested in 12 companies in our first 18 months. Our portfolio strategy was aggressive. $500,000 to $2 million in seed funding for companies that traditional VCs overlooked. Companies led by women, immigrants, people of color, first-generation college graduates. People who reminded me of myself at 22. One of those companies was called TechFlow. The founder was a brilliant engineer named David Park. He'd built an AI-powered project management platform that was genuinely revolutionary. It reduced project delays by 60% and could integrate with any existing workflow system. But he was pitching VCs who wanted to see proven leadership experience, which apparently meant gray hair and an MBA from Harvard. I saw the demo and knew immediately. This was a $500 million company waiting to happen. I invested $15.6 million in TechFlow's seed round, the largest single investment Catalyst Ventures had made. We structured it carefully, convertible note with a $40 million cap, giving us approximately 35% equity when they raised their Series A. I joined the board as lead investor. David was grateful. You're the only investor who actually understood what we're building. I know what it's like to be underestimated, I said. Just build something incredible. TechFlow exploded. Within 18 months, they had 2,000 enterprise clients, $12 million in revenue, and were projecting $45 million for the next year. Every major VC firm that had passed on David was now desperate to get into the Series A. Meanwhile, my cousin Mike had discovered entrepreneurship. He'd left his consulting job to start his own firm, a blockchain-based supply chain solution that was solving a problem nobody actually had. But Mike had gone to networking events, made connections, and somehow convinced a few small investors to give him $400,000 in pre-seed funding. At family dinners he became insufferable. The startup life is incredible, he'd announce. Of course it's not for everyone. You need vision, drive, the ability to think big. He'd look at me when he said it. I was 32. Secure Shield Solutions had just been acquired by a Fortune 500 company for $340 million. I'd personally netted $187 million after taxes. But Mike didn't know that. He thought I was still doing freelance website stuff. I'd moved to a penthouse in Tribeca, but I told my family I was house-sitting for a friend. I drove a Tesla Model S, but I parked it 3 blocks away before family gatherings and took an Uber the last bit. I wore clothes from Target to Christmas dinner while my actual wardrobe included pieces from designers my family had never heard of. As I was curious. I wanted to see how long they'd keep dismissing me. How far their assumptions would take them. And because some part of me, the part that remembered being 22 and humiliated, wanted to see the look on their faces when the truth finally came out. Mike's startup struggled. Of course it did. He'd built a solution looking for a problem, hired his fraternity brothers as co-founders, and spent money on expensive offices instead of product development. By month 18 he was desperately seeking new funding. That's when he approached David Park. Mike had heard through the tech community that TechFlow was hot. He didn't know I was their lead investor. Why would he? In his mind, I was his unemployed cousin who'd never amounted to anything. In his pitch to David, he positioned his blockchain solution as a potential integration partner for TechFlow's platform. David called me. Your cousin Mike just pitched us. Should I be concerned about the family connection? What did you think of the pitch? Honestly, weak. The technology doesn't solve a real problem, and his team doesn't have the engineering depth to execute even if it did. But he's making noise in the community and I wanted to check with you before I passed. Pass, I said. Don't invest time in courtesy meetings for my sake. Treat him like any other weak pitch. David passed. Mike was furious. He posted on LinkedIn about closed-minded investors who can't see revolutionary technology. He didn't name TechFlow, but everyone in his network knew who he was talking about. Then came Mike's second wedding. Jennifer had left him after 3 years. The startup stress, the financial pressure, and Mike's fundamental inability to admit he was wrong about anything had destroyed the marriage. He'd burned through his savings, maxed out credit cards, and was living in a studio apartment while trying to raise a Series A round that no serious investor would touch. But Mike had met Vanessa, a marketing executive who came from money and was impressed by his entrepreneur status. She didn't understand tech, didn't ask hard questions about his business, and was planning a wedding that cost more than Mike's startup had raised in total funding. I received the invitation with a note. Immediate family only, no plus ones. Trying to keep it intimate. The wedding was at an estate in Connecticut. 250 guests. So much for intimate. I wore a simple navy dress from Rent the Runway, $60 for the weekend. I did my own makeup. I took public transportation to Connecticut and then an Uber from the train station. I looked exactly like what Mike had always thought I was. The family member who'd never quite figured out success. The reception was lavish. Mike had clearly let Vanessa's family pay for everything, but he was acting like he'd financed it himself. I was seated at a table in the back with younger cousins and family friends' teenage children. That's when I saw them. At Mike's table, sitting in places of honor, 3 men in expensive suits. I recognized them from LinkedIn, venture capitalists who'd been circling TechFlow for months, trying to get into the Series A round. They were here because Mike had somehow convinced them he had inside connections to hot startups. Mike was pitching them his own company. At his wedding, claiming he was about to close a massive funding round, that he had strategic partnerships lined up, that his technology was months away from disrupting the entire supply chain industry. Then he pointed at me. "That's my cousin Rebecca," he told the investors, his voice carrying across the reception. "Basically unemployed. Has been for years. Family embarrassment, honestly." The investors glanced at me with polite pity. One of them murmured something about, "Every family has one." Mike continued, getting louder as the champagne hit his system. "I keep telling her she should get a real job, but some people just don't have the drive. You know, some people are content to just exist." Vanessa laughed. Other family members nodded knowingly. My mother looked at her plate, embarrassed as always. I adjusted my corsage, pulled out my phone, opened the encrypted message app one used for sensitive business communications. I typed to my Catalyst Ventures investment team, "Withdraw the $15.6 million seed investment from TechFlow immediately. Exercise the early liquidity clause in our convertible note agreement. Contact David Park to explain this is a strategic reallocation, nothing to do with company performance. Process the paperwork tonight." I hit send. Then I messaged David directly. "Mike Chen just publicly humiliated me at his wedding while pitching your competitors. I'm exercising our early exit clause. This isn't about TechFlow. You're brilliant and I believe in the company. But I won't be connected to anything Mike might touch. My lawyers will make the withdrawal clean. You'll have the $15.6 million returned by Monday. I'll recommend 3 other investors who can fill the gap." David responded in 30 seconds. "Understood. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. And thank you for everything." Mike was still talking, getting more animated. The problem with people like Rebecca is they don't understand what real entrepreneurship takes. They try these little side projects and when they fail, which they always do, they just give up. No resilience. No vision. The 3 investors were nodding. One asked, "What does she do now?" "Nothing," Mike said flatly. "Lives off savings, I guess. Or maybe our parents help her. It's sad, really." My phone buzzed. "My investment team. Withdrawal initiated. TechFlow has been notified. Legal team processing documentation. By Monday morning we'll have full liquidity." I stood up quietly. Walked to the restroom. In the marble-covered bathroom I called David Park. "I'm sorry to do this at your wedding investor pitch," I said when he answered. David laughed bitterly. "You mean the pitch where Mike is telling people he has strategic partnerships with us?" "Yeah. My CTO just texted me from the office. Our board portal shows the investment withdrawal notification. I sent 3 alternative investors your way. All solid. They'll move faster than we did and they'll give you better terms because I'll personally recommend you." Rebecca, you don't have to. I do. Because you're brilliant and tech flow is going to be massive. But I won't have my name attached to anything Mike might later claim he had influence over. Understood. David paused. For what it's worth, he told people here he's close to the tech flow team. Should I correct that? Not yet, I said. Let him dig the hole deeper. I returned to the reception. Mike had moved on from insulting me and was now explaining to the investors why his blockchain solution was going to revolutionize everything. My phone buzzed again. This time a news alert. TechFlow announces $65 million Series A led by Sequoia Capital. David had moved fast. The alternative investors I'd recommended had jumped on the opportunity. TechFlow was now valued at $280 million. My original $15.6 million investment, which I'd just withdrawn, would have been worth $48 million in the new round. But that wasn't the point. Mike's phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. And again. He glanced at it and I watched his face change. Confusion. Then panic. One of the investors asked, "Everything okay?" Yeah. Just some business stuff. Excuse me for a second. Mike stepped away from the table, phone pressed to his ear. Through the reception hall, I could see him gesturing frantically. The investor sitting closest to me, mid-50s, expensive watch, the kind of VC who'd passed on Facebook because college kids don't need another social network, leaned over. "Excuse me, you're Mike's cousin? Rebecca?" "Yes. I'm Howard Chen. No relation, different Chen. I'm a partner at Madison Ventures." He handed me a card. "Mike mentioned you're in tech?" "Sort of," I said. "I do some investing." "Investing?" Howard looked interested. "What kind of scale?" "Small stuff. Early stage companies." Mike rushed back to the table, face pale. "I need to make a call. Business emergency." Vanessa looked annoyed. "At our wedding?" "It's important," Mike snapped. He practically ran outside. Howard turned back to me. "So, early stage investing. What's your thesis?" "I focus on underrepresented founders. People who get overlooked by traditional VCs because they don't fit the Stanford MBA tech bro mold." Howard nodded thoughtfully. "Like TechFlow? David Park is brilliant. We tried to get into their seed round but someone else beat us to it. Catalyst Ventures, I think." I smiled politely. "I've heard of them. Do you know Rebecca Chen, the founder? He's doing incredible work. Her portfolio returns are insane, 45% average IRR. She's one of the best seed investors in the country right now." The other investor leaned in. "Wait, Catalyst Ventures? They just withdrew from TechFlow this evening. Huge news. The company announced a $65 million Series A minutes later, so clearly it wasn't performance related. Industry speculation is Catalyst is moving into later stage deals." Howard pulled out his phone. "Let me show you Rebecca Chen's LinkedIn." She spoke at, "Wait." He looked at his phone. Then at me. Then back at his phone. "Is this you?" He turned his phone around. My LinkedIn profile. Professional headshot. Title, Founder and Managing Partner, Catalyst Ventures. Former CEO, SecureShield Solutions, acquired $340 million. The table went silent. "You're Rebecca Chen?" Howard said slowly. "The Rebecca Chen?" "Yes. The one who built SecureShield from nothing and sold it for $340 million? "Yes. The one who runs a $200 million venture fund? $285 million now, actually. We raised an additional fund last quarter." The third investor stared. "You're the lead investor who just withdrew $15.6 million from TechFlow?" "I exercised an early liquidity clause, yes. I recommended 3 alternative investors to take my place. The company is in excellent hands." Howard looked toward where Mike had disappeared. "Your cousin just told us you were unemployed." "My cousin doesn't know what I do." "Why?" I smiled. "Because he never asked." Mike burst back into the reception, phone still in his hand, looking frantic. He made a beeline for the investors' table. "Howard, Richard, Tom, I need to explain something. There's been a misunderstanding about my TechFlow connections." Howard held up a hand. "Mike, do you know who your cousin is?" "Who, Rebecca?" Mike laughed nervously. She's Rebecca Chen. Catalyst Ventures. One of the most successful seed investors in the country. Mike's face went blank. What? Richard pulled up his phone. She was TechFlow's lead investor. She withdrew tonight. The $15.6 million investment you've been telling people you could help us access? That was her money. That's not, Mike looked at me. You. I adjusted my napkin. Said nothing. Tom stood up. Mike, you told us you had inside connections to TechFlow. You implied you could facilitate investment access. But you didn't know your own cousin was their lead investor. I didn't, she never said. You said she was unemployed, Howard said coldly. You called her a family embarrassment, while she's running a $285 million venture fund. Mike's face had gone from pale to gray. Becca, I didn't know. You never told anyone. You never asked, I said quietly. In 15 years, Mike, you never once asked what I actually did. You just assumed. You told everyone I was unemployed, that I was an embarrassment, that I'd failed. You did it at family dinners, at weddings, at every single gathering. You did it tonight in front of investors while you were pitching them your company. I didn't mean. The $15.6 million I withdrew from TechFlow tonight? I invested that 18 months ago. The company is now valued at $280 million. My stake would have been worth $48 million in the Series A round. I gave that up because I will not have my name connected to anything you might later claim credit for. The color drained from Mike's face completely. Richard closed his laptop. Mike, I think we're done here. Wait, my pitch, the funding round. We're not investing in your company, Tom said flatly. Anyone who doesn't know what his own cousin does for a living clearly doesn't do his research. If you missed something that obvious, what else are you missing? The three investors stood up. Howard paused in front of me. Miss Chen, my firm would love to co-invest with Catalyst on your next deal. May I have your contact information? I handed him my card. The real one. Managing partner, Catalyst Ventures. The investors left. Mike stood there frozen. Around the reception, family members were starting to notice something was wrong. My mother approached, concerned. Rebecca, what's happening? Mike just learned what I actually do for a living, I said calmly. What do you mean? I pulled out my phone. Showed her my LinkedIn profile. Then my Forbes interview from last year. 30 under 30 alum Rebecca Chen on building a $285 million fund. My mother's hand went to her mouth. You sold your company for $340 million. I own a venture capital firm. I invest in startups. The company Mike has been trying to get funding from? I was their biggest investor until tonight. Mike finally found his voice. Why didn't you tell us? Would you have believed me? I asked. Would any of you? Or would you have assumed I was lying, the way you assumed I was unemployed? Silence. I wasn't hiding, I said. I was watching. Every dismissive comment. Every assumption. Every time you introduced me as your unemployed cousin, or your family embarrassment. I was building something extraordinary while you were building judgments based on nothing. Mike's new wife Vanessa appeared. Mike, people are asking about the investors leaving. Not now, Mike snapped. I stood up. Congratulations on the wedding, Mike. I hope your marriage goes better than your funding round. I walked out of the reception. Behind me I could hear the whispers starting. My phone buzzed with messages from other family members who just Googled my name. By Monday morning 3 things had happened. First, TechFlow's Series A officially closed. David Park sent me a bottle of champagne and a note. Thank you for believing in us first. You'll always be the investor who saw what others missed. Second, Mike's startup officially collapsed. The investors he'd been courting pulled out completely. His remaining co-founders quit. His LinkedIn changed from CEO to seeking new opportunities. Third, my family group chat exploded. Apologies, explanations, excuses. My mother wanted to talk about why I felt I couldn't share. Aunts and uncles who'd pitted me for 15 years suddenly wanted investment advice. I responded to none of them. Instead, I wrote a LinkedIn post. To everyone who called me unemployed while I was building. Thank you. Your dismissal taught me who to trust. Your assumptions showed me who actually cared enough to ask. Your judgments reminded me why I built Catalyst Ventures. Because the world needs fewer investors who judge based on appearances and more investors who judge based on merit. To the founders out there being called unemployed, or unfocused, or dreamers, by people who don't understand what you're building. Keep building. The best revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's succeeding so completely that their opinion becomes irrelevant. The post went viral. 48,000 likes. 3,200 comments. Coverage in TechCrunch, Forbes, and Business Insider. Mike texted me 3 weeks later. Can we talk? I responded, no. He texted again, I'm sorry. I didn't respond. Because here's what Mike and my whole family never understood. I didn't need their apology. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need them to finally see what I'd built. I needed them to understand that dismissing someone because they don't look successful is a choice. And that choice has consequences. Mike's consequence? He lost the biggest career opportunity he'd ever have. Not because his company wasn't good enough, it wasn't, but because he'd spent 15 years mocking someone who could have changed his life with a single introduction. My consequence? I built an empire while everyone assumed I'd failed. And when the truth came out, I didn't need to say a word. The evidence spoke for itself. 6 months later, Catalyst Ventures closed Fund 3. $480 million. We're now one of the top 20 seed stage funds in the country. I've been invited to ring the NYSE bell, keynote major conferences, and advise Fortune 500 CEOs on innovation strategy. My family, they tell everyone about their incredibly successful cousin in tech. I let them, because they're not wrong anymore. They're just 15 years too late. And in venture capital, timing is everything.